These are the players we need to send a trade offer for before Sunday so we can absolutely fleece our league mates. And make sure to stick around to the end of the video because I'll give you guys a list of a few players we need to be selling high on as soon as possible before their value absolutely goes to zero. As we get into it, hit that subscribe button. We're on our road to 25K thanks to all of you guys. And hit that like button as well for some good fantasy luck moving forward. But by far, the number one best buy low candidate, buy before it's too late candidate at this point, is Ladd McConkey. And it's not your classic example of a buy low like a Bijan Robinson or a Devontae Adams or somebody you drafted really high because his draft capital really wasn't there and you don't have to spend a ton to get him, but his underlying numbers are 100% there. If we go through and look at them, he's averaging 10.5 fantasy points a game, 6.5 targets per game, which isn't necessarily amazing. But you look at this Chargers offense as well. Harbaugh really hasn't let Justin Herbert go be Justin Herbert. I mean, if you compare last season to this season, his highest game in passing attempts is only 27, outside of last week's matchup against the Broncos, where that was the first time they actually let him go through and pass. They held a pass-heavy script pretty much that entire game, which led him to 34 pass attempts in his first game of the entire season, over 180 passing yards. I expect that number of 180 to be up more to a little bit higher than 200. Like 180 is really, really low. I get this offense is very run first, but even if you take out that speculation of this offense being a little bit more pass heavy, they rank dead last in passing attempts. Ladd McConkey has a 26% team target share and a 32% team air yard share through the first 5 weeks of the season as a rookie. That is insane. Like, those numbers are up at the top with guys like Malik Neighbors and Brock Bowers, but we don't talk about him. And if he had the same level of passing volume as a guy like Malik Neighbors and Daniel Jones giving 35 attempts a game, he would 100% be a top receiver in the entire NFL in these fantasy numbers. The problem here, again, is that the Chargers are really slow paced. They are the 4th lowest team in dropbacks and plays per minute, and that likely isn't going to change an insane amount. I'm not expecting the Chargers offense to completely flip upside down, but he's the wide receiver 50 right now. And those rookie wide receivers tend to increase in usage and volume and time on field as the season goes on. It's a statistical fact. And he does have some positive passing matchups coming here with the Cardinals, Saints, and the Browns. He has the 2nd highest PFF grade out of every single rookie wide receiver this year, only behind Malik Neighbors. You can get him for complete pennies. It is only a matter of time until he emerges himself as the clear-cut wide receiver 1 for this Chargers offense, and he's going to be untouchable as far as the value now that we can get him at. But by far, the best running back that we have to go through and get, which again isn't going to be your conventional buy low guy, Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not a player with his value in the absolute dumpster because real buy low candidates don't actually exist in the means of buying low because the name value is there for a reason. You have to buy them when the opportunity shows. That opportunity is here for Jahmyr Gibbs. Despite being drafted as the RB5 or 6 or 7 in your league, he's the RB13 right now, coming off his worst fantasy day of 12.4 fantasy points against the Dallas Cowboys. A game where the Lions put up almost 50 points. He didn't score a touchdown, only 12 fantasy points. Like, that's not right. But it's one of those situations we have to look at the statistics. The Lions team is top 10 in every single rushing statistic this year. They are 9th in rush attempts, 7th in yards, 4th in red zone usage, and the volume 100% is there. Everybody is worried about David Montgomery, though, getting all this volume, which he still is going to have a role. You can't really argue that he's not. He was brought onto this team for a reason, and he is the RB10 compared to Gibbs at the RB13. Like, that's a major red flag. He even has more rushing attempts than him and 6 touchdowns in 5 games. Like, that is a pretty worrisome stat. Now we have Gibbs coming off his bye week and then against Dallas last week, moving into the next 2 weeks here in really tough matchups against the Minnesota Vikings and the Titans, who both have bottom 10 defenses and fantasy points allowed to running backs. They are very, very tough. So this is a great buy low window here in the next few weeks. I would still try to do it sooner rather than later because it's Jahmyr Gibbs and the Lions, but I fully expect Jahmyr Gibbs to pop off in the second half after his bye week. We saw that exact same thing last year. After his bye week is when he started to make his RB5 run. His touches per game increased by 30%. His routes run out of the backfield also increased as well. His red zone utilization had a big increase, scoring a touchdown on 33% of his games before the bye week and then 72% of his games after his bye week with multiple 2-touchdown games. And that may seem unattainable for him in the future, but you look at David Montgomery, he's had 19 touchdowns in his last 19 games. Again, multiple games with over 2 touchdowns. So if any team's going to do it, the Lions will get rushing usage, will use their running backs in the red zone. It's just what they do. But possibly the most important information about all of this is that Dan Campbell spoke out about this backfield saying, exactly quote for quote, "We know what David can do, but we know that Gibbs has gotten better every week. I think it'll be a little bit by committee and make sure we get those guys touches. Gibbs will get his touches," which is a very positive statement coming from a coach. But if we look at every statement that Dan Campbell has made to the media, he has an 85% reliability on depth charts and usage according to the Data by Coach Speak Index. And we can't forget that Jahmyr Gibbs was dealing with an injury in the pre-draft process in fantasy football and also the preseason, so that could be a factor on why he hasn't been seeing the usage we've expected. That again is another reason pointing upwards to increasing more usage. But now here, a high tier player that we can buy and we have to buy before it's too late is CeeDee Lamb. And for his standards, he has severely been underperforming. This guy is the wide receiver 9, averaging 15.4 fantasy points a game through these first 6 weeks. Coming into his bye week, use that as an advantage in trades to get you a little bit more value back because he's not going to be playing this week. But CeeDee Lamb has only had one game over 20 fantasy points, and that was against the Giants in week 4, where he still only had 8 targets and scored a touchdown, which increased his fantasy points a ton. Like, it hasn't really been any dominant performances, which we're used to from CeeDee Lamb, especially for a lot of people that took him as the number 1 wide receiver off the board. But numbers that nobody should really be too surprised about, and numbers I don't have to go in depth for, is that CeeDee Lamb still has the volume. He's the wide receiver 8 in routes run per game in the entire NFL, and the wide receiver 7 in targets in the entire NFL. So the Cowboys, they have a very favorable rest of season schedule coming up, including the fantasy playoffs, so it's a good buy now and for the rest of the year. It is only a matter of time until he has a CeeDee Lamb-esque game, and you're going to have to give everything on your team to go get him. But you know that Tyreek Hill and Devon Achane have to be on this list. These guys are not doing well. 12.9 fantasy points for Hill, 2.7 fantasy points, and coming off injury for Devon Achane before their bye week that we just came from. And this offense looks absolutely terrible, but the only good news, and pretty much the only thing that can save them and what we're banking on, is that Tua is almost a guarantee to come back at some point in this season. Is it going to be week 7? No, it's already confirmed that he's not. At the earliest he can come back, it's week 8. Do I think that's going to happen? It'll probably take a couple more weeks than that. I'm expecting around week 10, but even then, that's a good amount of weeks until your fantasy football playoff schedule will come, and a lot of weeks that the Devon Achane owners and the Tyreek Hill owners are going to be down and probably continuing to see a losing record because those are their first picks. And you look at this offense, none of the numbers are helping them. With Tyler Huntley, they are 30th in passing yards, 29th in red zone usage. Like, every single passing stat is very, very bad. Tyreek Hill and Achane are still elite players. Their value is just so skewed because of obviously what's been happening. If you guys have questions about who exactly to trade from your team to get these guys, and if you're overpaying, make sure to drop them in the comments. I will be getting to as many as I possibly can, like always. But if you're looking for a tight end, which I'm sure almost everybody is going to be doing, David Njoku is that answer for you for more reasons than one. Everybody's just fed up with this offense, and I understand it. But guess what? Amari Cooper is no longer on the Browns, which opens up even more targets for David Njoku. And let me get into his numbers even with Amari Cooper in this offense and why we should be buying him. Deshaun Watson, if you've been around these videos for long enough, you know he's 8th in passing attempts, hasn't still had one game over 200 in passing yards. That's worse than Jacoby Brissett. That's worse than Bo Nix. This offense is terrible, and Amari Cooper is also leading the team in uncatchable air yards and targets. That's just not good. And unfortunately, with the money that the Browns have shoveled into Deshaun Watson and can't really get away from, he's not going to be benched for Jameis Winston. Maybe a game if he gets injured and then they just try to prolong it, but he cannot throw downfield, which we've seen from Amari Cooper's numbers. But that allows David Njoku to be a top target for Deshaun Watson to keep everything in front of him, which is why he led the team last week in targets with 7. He's the best run blocker this team has as far as tight ends go, which is going to keep him on the field. He's also the best receiver this team has, which even more is going to keep him on the field with Deshaun Watson in there. He runs a ton of routes. He sees everything you need to see as a tight end. The only problem is that he's been riddled with injuries. That's the only issue here. In week 1, though, he only had 37% of the snaps due to his injury, but finished as the tight end 9. Then in week 5, he saw 3 targets, again, only playing 42% of the snaps. When this guy is healthy, though, we've seen in previous years, he's an absolutely dominant tight end. He led all tight ends in yards after catch last year and was the tight end 6. Now, to be fair, a lot of that success came from Joe Flacco and not Deshaun Watson. But even when Watson was on this team, he was getting the targets and he was a top guy. And now that we don't have Amari Cooper, there's really nobody else to go to outside of him, Jerry Jeudy, and Elijah Moore. You can expect Njoku, when he is healthy, to get most of these targets. Go get him now while you still can. His value is insanely low. He might even be on waivers. I doubt it. I hope not. But get him on your team. And the players we need to sell high on, and this one really is unfortunate, it's going to be Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. If you've seen enough of these videos, you know how high I've been on Josh Downs in the beginning of the season in week 1, 2, and 3 before he came back from his injury. Then when he came back from his injury, he was still barely rostered, and then he started to blow up. Now he's rostered in 70% plus of leagues. But we need to be selling him and Michael Pittman. The unfortunate truth is that you need to ride with the flows of fantasy football, and Anthony Richardson just does not support these wide receivers like Joe Flacco does. It's a fact, it's unfortunate, but it's true. The main reason for this is because of the pass volume. It is so low and so different compared to Joe Flacco, With Richardson this year, in his healthy games, he's averaging 24.3 passing attempts. That is dead last in the NFL by a large amount. Compared to Joe Flacco, he's averaging 36 passing attempts a game. That would be top 5 in the NFL. These are two complete polar opposites. But then we take those numbers comparatively and put it to the wide receivers. In the one game Josh Downs has played with Anthony Richardson so far this year, he had 5 targets compared to week 4, 5, and 6 with Joe Flacco. He's averaging 10 targets a game. The same goes for Michael Pittman. His opportunities and volume are going up with more passing attempts and valuable targets from Joe Flacco. This offense is also decreasing in touchdowns and just red zone efficiency with Anthony Richardson. With Joe Flacco, there was 7 passing touchdowns in 3 weeks. That's more than Anthony Richardson has ever had in the history of his entire career combined. To be fair, he has been injured for more than half of his career, but Joe Flacco at 40 years old is outproducing him. Like, that's not good. Joe Flacco has these 2 wide receivers averaging over 15 fantasy points a game. Downs is great. He's a great talent, which is why I wanted to add him and why we got him on our teams. But it's time to go ahead and flip him for real value that we can get before Anthony Richardson comes back. Now, it's not going to be a complete throwaway, but their value is definitely going to get lower, and you can get some good guys for them now while you can. That is going to finish off this video. Keep your eye out for the stash video coming tomorrow. I will see you guys in that video coming later.